The Malthari research vessel Luminous Inquiry drifted through the void like a sliver of frozen lightning, its flowing organic hull shimmering with aurora hues. Bioluminescent panels pulsed along its spine, casting shifting violet reflections across the crystalline observation decks. High Commander Malthari stood at the central spire, his six-fingered hands resting against the translucent interface as data streams flickered across its surface. They had found something, buried beneath the ice of a nameless moon circling a dying star. The sensors had detected an anomaly, a structure of crude, angular design, utterly alien amidst the Malthari's wind-carved aesthetics. Thalolan, lead xenologist of the Inquiry, had called it a time capsule, though Malthari privately thought it looked more like a tomb. Commander, Thalolan's voice resonated through the chamber, harmonic and precise. The scans confirm it. This is a human relic, pre-Exodus era. Malthari's crest of silver filaments stiffened. The humans, a species the Malthari had observed from afar, cataloging their wars, their reckless expansion, their brief and bloody rise before their civilization had seemingly vanished from the galactic stage. They had been deemed extinct, or at least irrelevant. Yet here they were. The excavation drones returned with their prize, a cryopod, its surface scarred by centuries of cosmic radiation, but still intact. The design was brutally utilitarian, a stark contrast to the Malthari's flowing alloys and atmospheric condensers. Inside, barely visible through the frosted glass, was a figure. Thalolan's fingers danced across the interface, his bioluminescent veins flickering with excitement. Vital signs are minimal, but stable. The cryogenic systems are primitive, yet effective. Malthari exhaled slowly. This was more than a relic. This was a living artifact. A survivor from an age when humanity had clawed its way into the stars with crude fusion drives and ballistic weapons. "Wake it," he ordered. Thalolan hesitated. "Commander, we have no idea what state its mind will be in. Human neurology is—" "Wake it," Malthari repeated, his voice a low thrum of command. Thalolan obeyed. The cryopod hissed as ancient mechanisms shuddered to life. Frost melted in rivulets down the pod sides, and the figure within twitched, a slow, involuntary spasm of muscles, long frozen. Then, with a sound like cracking ice, the pod seals released. The human collapsed forward, gasping. His bare hands slamming against the deck for balance. His skin was pale, his body lean but corded with muscle that spoke of a lifetime of war. His eyes snapped open, pupils dilating in the violet light of the Malthari ship. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the human lunged. Malthari barely registered the movement before the human was on him, one hand locking around his throat, the other driving toward his ribs in a strike that would have shattered bone had Thalolan not activated the containment field. The human snarled as the energy barrier flared, throwing him back. He hit the ground rolling, coming up in a crouch, his breath ragged but his stance coiled like a predator's. The Malthari guards raised their pulse, staves, but Malthari lifted a hand, stopping them. The human's eyes darted between them, calculating, assessing. There was no fear in that gaze, only cold, razor-edged awareness. Thalolan's voice was hushed. "Commander, it's reflexes. It's strength. This isn't deterioration. This is enhancement." Malthari studied the human, his own pulse steady despite the adrenaline still humming through his veins. The creature before him was not some fragile relic of a dead age. It was a weapon, and it was awake. The containment field hummed, its purple-white energy rippling like disturbed water as the human studied it. His fingers flexed, testing, probing. Before he finally stilled, though his muscles remained taut, ready to spring. The Malthari guards kept their pulse, staves leveled, their crystalline armor catching the ambient glow of the lab's bioluminescent panels. Malthari exhaled slowly. He had expected a relic, some fragile, half-decayed specimen from a forgotten war. Instead, the human was alive in a way that unsettled him. His movements were too precise, his gaze too sharp. Even now, trapped behind an energy barrier, he radiated danger. Thalolan adjusted the holographic readouts with trembling fingers. "Commander, his neural activity is accelerated." The cryostasis didn't degrade his systems, it refined them. Malthari didn't respond. He was too busy watching the human's eyes. They flickered between the guards, the exits, the control panels, assessing weaknesses, planning. A predator's gaze. Then, without warning, the human smiled. It wasn't a gesture of warmth. It was the baring of teeth. Thalolan stiffened. "He's analyzing us," Malthari knew. He had seen that look before on the battlefield, in the eyes of warriors who had stared death in the face and laughed. The human spoke. His voice was rough, unused for centuries, but the words were clear. "Where's my ship?" The Malthari exchanged glances. They had expected confusion, fear, perhaps even gratitude at being revived. Not this demand. Malthari stepped forward. "Your vessel was destroyed. You've been in stasis for phase cycles." The human absorbed this without reaction. His fingers tapped once against his thigh, a controlled, rhythmic motion calculating. "Then who the hell are you?" Thalolan hesitated before answering. "We are the Malthari sovereignty. We recovered your pod from a derelict battlefield." The human's gaze darkened. Battlefield. Malthari saw the shift in his posture, the tightening of his shoulders, the way his weight settled onto the balls of his feet. He recognized the signs. Combat readiness. Thalolan, oblivious, continued. "Yes, the remnants of the Third Expansion War. Your people." The human moved. One moment he was still. The next, his fist slammed into the containment field, with enough force to send fractures spiderwebbing through the energy matrix. The lab's alarms shrieked as the system overloaded. Purple, white tendrils of power lashing out like wounded serpents. The guards fired. Pulse, round streaked toward the human, only for him to twist mid-air, his body bending in ways that should have been impossible. He landed in a crouch, one hand already snatching a discarded shard of crystalline plating from the floor. Then he threw it. The shard embedded itself in the nearest guard's throat. The Malthari stared, stunned, as their comrade collapsed, hissing violet blood pooling beneath him. The human didn't wait. He lunged for the next guard, his movements a blur of lethal efficiency. Malthari acted on instinct. He triggered the emergency stasis lock. The lab's atmospheric condensers flared, and the human froze mid-stride, encased in a sudden cocoon of violet energy. His snarl of fury was the last thing to be silenced as the field solidified. Thalolan was shaking, his reflexes, his speed. "Commander, this isn't just enhancement. This is evolution." Malthari didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the human's face, still twisted in rage even as the stasis held him immobile. They had woken something they didn't understand. And now it wanted blood. The stasis field hummed, its violet-white energy swirling in slow, hypnotic currents around the frozen human. Thalolan's fingers trembled as he adjusted the bioscanner, its crystalline interface casting pale reflections across his silver-ridged face. The readings made no sense. Muscle density, twice that of a baseline human. Neural conductivity, accelerated beyond any recorded parameters. Even the man's blood had changed, thickened with something the Malthari systems could only classify as unknown adaptive compounds. "Commander," Thalolan whispered, his voice barely audible over the lab's ambient ionization hum. "He shouldn't be alive, not after this long in cryo, not with these readings." Malthari didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the human's face. The way his pupils had dilated into black voids, the way his lips had curled back in a snarl that was more animal than man. The stasis field had trapped him mid-lunge, one arm outstretched, fingers hooked like claws. A predator, frozen in the act of killing. Malvar had seen warriors before. The Malthari had their own elite blade, dancers who moved with the precision of wind, carved crystal, tacticians who waged war like a symphony of controlled destruction. But this was something else. The human hadn't fought. He had hunted, and he had been enjoying it. A chime sounded from the lab's central console. The Lowland flinched, then hurried to the display, his bioluminescent markings flickering with unease. "The neural scan is complete," he murmured. "His subconscious is still active, even in stasis." Malvar stepped closer. "He's what?" The Lowland swallowed. Dreaming, the projection shimmered into existence above the console. A fractured, chaotic swirl of images. A battlefield, smoke, choked and littered with corpses. A city burning under a sky the color of rust. And then, Malvar recoiled as the human's mind conjured him. His own silver-scaled face, his violet eyes, but twisted, distorted. In the human subconscious, Malvar was not a captor. He was prey. The projection shifted again. Tactical overlays flickered through the haze. Lines of approach, weak points in armor. The precise angle needed to drive a blade between ribs. Not random violence, calculated. The Lowland's breath hitched. "Commander." Hez rehearsing. Malvar's pulse thrummed in his secondary arteries, a rapid, uneasy rhythm. The human wasn't just dreaming of violence. He was planning it. The stasis field flickered. A single ripple of distortion raced through the containment, and for one heart-stopping moment, the human's fingers twitched. The Lowland staggered back. "That's impossible. The field is at full integrity." Malvar didn't wait for an explanation. He slammed his palm against the lab's emergency comm. "All security units to Cryo Lab 7. Now, the human's lips curled further, as if he were laughing. The containment lab hummed with the dissonant harmonics of a dozen overlapping alarms. Bioluminescent panels along the walls pulsed crimson, their usual aurora, like serenity shattered by the jagged strobe of emergency protocols. The Lowland's fingers danced across the crystalline interface, his normally precise movements now erratic, his translucent silver skin flushed with streaks of pale violet, the Malthari equivalent of panic. "Stasis field integrity at Fei. No, Fei." His voice wavered. "Commander, this isn't a malfunction, it's suppression." Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second, a reflexive gesture of disbelief. The human wasn't just moving within the stasis field, he was fighting it. The containment chamber's energy readings spiked in erratic waves, the purple, white streams of stabilizing power now twisting like serpents caught in a storm. And then the numbers stopped making sense. The Lowland's breath came in short, ionized bursts as the holographic displays fractured into nonsense. His neural activity, it's overriding the field's dampeners. That's not possible. No organic mind can generate that kind of localized EM interference. Malvar's claws flexed. The sharp tip scraping against the aerogel reinforced flooring. He had seen warriors of 100 species break under interrogation, had watched entire fleets surrender when their shields collapsed. But this, a single dormant human, not even awake, bending physics to his will. The containment chamber's outer shell vibrated, a subsonic tremor that made the Malthari's inner ear membranes ache. The human's fingers twitched again. This time, the movement was deliberate. A single index finger extended, tracing an arc through the air as if testing resistance. As mapping the field, the realization struck Malvar like a plasma round to the chest. The human wasn't just resisting, he was learning, adapting. The stasis field was supposed to be a perfect stasis. No time, no thought, no change. Yet somehow, the human's mind was treating it like another battlefield, another system to exploit. Security teams flooded the lab, their armor's crystalline plating glinting under the emergency lights. Their weapon arrays hummed to life, streams of charged particles aligning into lethal focus. Malvar raised a hand, halting them. "Hold fire." His voice was a blade of forced calm. He still contained. Thalolan wasn't listening. His attention was locked onto the biometric feed, where the human's vitals spiraled into impossible configurations. Commander, his metabolic rate, it's accelerating. The numbers on the screen climbed: heart rate, Fe BPM, Fe, core temperature, Fe, Fe. Synaptic firing patterns erupted into fractal cascades, the neural activity so intense it registered as weapon. Grade energy spikes on the lab's secondary scanners. The stasis field bent. A visible distortion rippled through the containment chamber, the air itself warping like molten glass. The human's eyelids fluttered. Thalolan's voice was a whisper. He's not just waking up, he's burning through the field. Malthar's tactical instincts screamed. Every species had limits. Every mind had thresholds. But the human's physiology was responding to stasis, like it was a challenge, like his body was treating centuries of suspended animation as a mere obstacle to overcome. The security team's weapon arrays flickered, their targeting systems glitching as the human's bioelectric field swelled. One of the Malthari warriors took an involuntary step back, his armor's energy signature flaring in dissonance. Malthar didn't blame him. The numbers kept climbing, and the human smiled. Section Fe, silent killers. The containment chamber hummed with displaced energy, the air thick with ozone and something darker, something alive. The human's smile didn't fade as his fingers twitched, tendons flexing beneath skin that should have been atrophied, muscles that should have been dust. Instead, they rippled, as if responding to some silent command, some primal rhythm the Malthari couldn't hear. Thalolan's hands hovered over the console, bioluminescent panels flickering under his touch. His secondary eyelids nictated rapidly, a subconscious stress response. The human's vitals weren't just stable. They were escalating, heart rate accelerating, neural activity spiking in jagged, unpredictable waves. The stasis field had been designed to suppress biological functions, to lock a being in perfect stillness. But the human's body was treating it like a warm-up. Malthar's armor thrummed against his carapace, its energy flow disrupted by the sheer bioelectric interference radiating from the human. His tactical overlay flickered, throwing fragmented data across his vision. Muscle density, Fe baseline, metabolic rate, unsustainable, adrenaline levels, lethal for Fe of known species. A warning glyph pulsed in his peripheral, biological hazard. The human exhaled. The sound was wrong. Too deep, too controlled. Not the gasp of a creature dragged from the abyss of cryosleep, but the measured breath of a predator stepping into the light. His eyes opened fully now, pupils dilating as they adjusted to the sterile glow of Malthari lighting. They didn't scan the room in confusion. They tracked. First, the security team, then Thalolan, then Malthar. The High Commander felt it like a physical weight. That gaze wasn't just awareness. It was assessment, calculating angles, weaknesses, escape routes. The human's lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with disuse, but horrifyingly clear. "Where's my unit?" Thalolan flinched. Malthar didn't. The human's dialect was archaic, the vowels rounded with an accent dead for centuries, but the tone that was universal. It wasn't a request. It was a demand, edged with the unspoken promise of violence if unanswered. Thalolan recovered first, his voice modulator smoothing the unease from his words. "You've been in stasis for approximately Fe-standard cycles. Your unit is no longer operational." The human didn't react, not outwardly, but the air in the chamber shifted. A pressure change, so subtle the Malthari sensors barely registered it. Malthar's combat instincts flared. Had seen this before. In the split second before a plasma storm hit, in the eerie calm before a reactor breach. Then the human moved. One moment, he was lying on the examination slab. The next, he was standing, the stasis field shattering around him in a burst of violet static. The security team's weapons snapped up in unison, barrels humming with charged energy. The human ignored them. His focus was locked on Thalolan. Operational status, he repeated. Quieter this time, Thalolan's frill spines pressed flat against his skull. Deceased. All of them. The war ended centuries ago. The human's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A minute tightening of the shoulders, a fractional tilt of the head. Malvar had studied human physiology. He recognized the signs. Acceptance. The human exhaled again, long and slow. And when he spoke next, his voice was eerily calm. Then what am I doing here? Thalolan hesitated. Study. Your species was thought extinct. You're a relic. The human's smile returned, sharp as a monomolecular blade. Relics don't breathe. And then the lights went out. Not a power failure. A pulse, a burst of electromagnetic distortion erupted from the human's body, shorting out every system in the chamber. Bioluminescent panels died. Weapon arrays sputtered and died. For 3 heartbeats, there was only darkness and the sound of the human stepping forward. Malvar's armor switched to emergency optics, just in time to see the human move. No hesitation, no wasted motion. A single stride, a twist of the torso, and the nearest security officer was on the ground, his weapon in the human's hands. The others barely had time to react before the human fired. Not at them, but at the ceiling. The shot struck a primary power conduit, and the resulting explosion bathed the room in actinic light. When the glare faded, the human was gone. Thalolan's voice was barely audible over the klaxons. He shouldn't his muscles, his nervous system. How is he moving like that? Malvar didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the spot where the human had stood. At the footprints left behind, not in the floor, but in the air. Faint, shimmering distortions, lingering like heat haze. As if the human hadn't just broken stasis. As if had evolved in it. Section Fey. The breaking point, the Malthari command spire, trembled as emergency containment fields flared to life, their aurora-colored barriers rippling like liquid glass. Malvar's talons dug into the console as he watched the human's thermal signature flicker through the ship's labyrinthine corridors. Not fleeing, not hiding. Hunting. Thalolan's bioluminescent markings pulsed in frantic violet waves. His vitals, they're not stabilizing, they're accelerating. The scientist's voice was a blade of disbelief. His cells are metabolizing at Fey baseline human capacity. His neural activity, stars above. It's like his synapses are rewriting themselves in real time. Malvar didn't respond. His attention was locked on the security feeds, where the human moved with predatory precision. The Malthari had designed their vessels with elegance, sweeping organic passages of crystalline alloy and flowing energy conduits. But now those curves became ambush points, those open galleries, kill zones. The human used everything. A flick of his wrist redirected a drone's ion beam into a power relay, collapsing a hallway behind him in a cascade of purple, white sparks. A sidestep turned a pursuing guard's momentum against him, sending the alien crashing into a wall with a sickening crack of chitinous plating. The feed from Deck 7 dissolved into static. When it resolved, the human stood amidst 6 unconscious Malthari, their limbs bent at angles their biology wasn't meant to tolerate. He wasn't even breathing hard. Thalolan's voice was hollow. He's adapting, not just to our ship, to us. Malvar finally turned, his crest flaring in agitation. Explain. The scientist's claws danced over holograms, pulling up scans from the cryopod. The stasis field. We assumed it preserved him. But human cellular decay operates differently. Their mitochondria thrive under stress. The pod didn't freeze him, it trained him. Every second in stasis was his body learning to survive the void, to endure extremes no organic should. A new alert blared Deck 12. The armory, Malvar's blood ran cold. The human Dixon, his name was Dixon, moved through the armory like a sculptor assessing raw material. His fingers traced the sleek lines of Malthari pulse rifles, their organic triggers humming under his touch. Too delicate, he discarded them. Then he saw it, a prototype, a weapon the Malthari had deemed too volatile for deployment. A plasma caster, its core a swirling maelstrom of ionized violet fire. The technicians had nicknamed it Storm's Teeth. Dixon hefted it. The weapon's biometric locks flared, then died as his augmented nervous system overrode them. Somewhere deep in the ship, an alarm began to scream. The Lowland's screens exploded with warnings. His not just stealing it, his modifying it. Bypassing safeties we didn't think could be bypassed. Malvar watched, transfixed, as the human's hands moved with terrifying certainty. Stripping panels, rerouting energy flows. The weapon's aura shifted from violet to a seething, unstable blue, white. That output. The Lowland's voice cracked. It'll vaporize half the deck if he fires it. Malvar's mandibles clenched. He knows. And then, as if sensing their gaze, Dixon looked up directly into the nearest surveillance node. His lips moved. No audio, but Malvar didn't need it. The human was smiling. Next section preview. The Malthari's fatal miscalculation. They assumed stasis meant stagnation. Dixon's body has been training for centuries in suspended animation. The plasma caster's true purpose, and why only a human could wield it. Malvar's realization, they didn't wake a relic. They unleashed a predator. The Malthari had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that centuries in cryostasis would have dulled the human, weakened his reflexes, softened his instincts, that he would be a relic, a curiosity to be studied and catalogued before being safely discarded. They were wrong. Malvar watched the feed in silence, his bioluminescent veins pulsing with unease. Dixon moved through the weapon chamber like a shadow given form, his hands stripping open Malthari systems with terrifying familiarity. The plasma caster, a weapon designed for Malthari physiology, calibrated to their neural harmonics, should have been unusable to him. The human wasn't just wielding it, he was improving it. The Lowland's voice was a strained whisper. He's bypassing the harmonic dampeners. That weapon was never meant to fire at full output outside of vacuum containment. Malvar didn't need the explanation. The shifting hue of the plasma core told him everything. Violet to blue, white, then a seething, unstable crimson. The containment field flickered, warping the air around it like heat haze over desert stone. Dixon's fingers danced across the controls, not with hesitation, not with trial and error, but with the cold precision of a man who had spent lifetimes mapping every circuit in his mind. He's been training, Malvar realized, the horror of it settling into his exoskeleton like ice. In stasis, his body was frozen, but his mind. The Lowland's frills flattened against his skull. That's impossible. Neural degradation alone. Look at him. Dixon's eyes were sharp. Too sharp. There was no disorientation, no sluggishness. Only focus, only intent. The human turned his head slightly, as if sensing their observation, and his lips curled. Just a predator's smile. The Malthari had studied human warfare. They had dissected their tactics, their weapons, their history of conflict. They had accounted for their adaptability, their stubborn refusal to die. But they had never accounted for this. A soldier who had spent centuries in the dark, rehearsing battles that never came. A mind honed in silence, sharpened by time itself. Dixon wasn't just awake. He was ready. The plasma caster hummed, its containment field, now a spiderweb of fractures. The Lowland's claws twitched toward the emergency purge controls, but Malvar stopped him with a single raised limb. Because Dixon wasn't aiming at them, he was aiming at the wall. The realization struck like a particle lance. The human wasn't trying to kill them. He was sending a message. The blast tore through 3 layers of reinforced aerogel plating before dissipating into the void beyond. The recoil should have shattered Dixon's arm, should have liquefied his bones. Instead, he absorbed the force like a man who had spent lifetimes bracing for it. Alarms shrieked. Atmospheric containment protocols engaged. The Malthari crew scrambled, their flowing silver forms darting like startled fish. Dixon didn't move. He stood in the center of the chaos, the plasma caster still humming in his grip, and waited. For the first time in centuries, the Malthari understood true fear, not of a weapon, not of a soldier, but of what a human could become when given time. Malvar exhaled, his respiratory vents flaring. They hadn't woken a relic. They had unleashed a predator, and now it was looking right at them. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something far heavier. The Malthari command deck hummed with the low, pulsing glow of emergency containment fields, casting shifting auroras of violet and silver across the crystalline surfaces. The air tasted of ionized metal, sharp and electric, as if the ship itself held its breath. Malvar's secondary eyelids flickered, his bioluminescent veins dimming in a subconscious display of submission. His mind raced, parsing the impossible. The human Dixon had just fired a weapon that should have torn him apart. Yet he stood there, unshaken, the plasma caster's barrel still radiating heat waves that distorted the air around it. The shot had been precise, surgical, a demonstration, not an execution. This was control. The Lowland's neural tendrils trembled as she analyzed the residual energy signatures. The blast had bypassed critical systems, carving a path through non-essential structural layers. A warning shot, a mockery of their defenses. Her thoughts spiraled. How many calculations had the human performed in the span of a heartbeat to achieve that? How many lifetimes of war had honed such instinct? Dixon lowered the weapon. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed, but his eyes, those ancient ice-blue eyes, locked onto Malvar with the weight of centuries. There was no malice there, no rage. Only the quiet certainty of a predator who had long since learned the difference between a threat and a curiosity. Malvar's mandibles tightened. He had commanded fleets, negotiated with empires, stood before the crystalline thrones of the Malthari High Synod without flinching. Yet now, under the gaze of this single human, he felt the primal urge to step back. Thalolan's voice was a whisper, transmitted through the neural link rather than spoken aloud. His physiology, it's not just preserved, it's enhanced. The cryostasis didn't degrade him, it refined him. Malvar's pulse thrummed in his secondary circulatory network. Of course, the humans had always been creatures of adaptation, but this was evolution accelerated by time itself. Centuries of suspended animation had not weakened Dixon's body. It had allowed his cells to rest, to repair, to optimize in ways their scans couldn't yet comprehend. Dixon turned his head slightly, as if listening to something beyond their hearing. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached up and tapped the side of his helmet. A burst of static hissed through the comms before resolving into a voice. Human, female, laced with the same timeless calm. Captain Dixon status. Dixon's lips curled, just slightly. Demonstration complete. Major, they're paying attention now. Malvar's neural receptors flared. Another one. Thalolan's tendrils coiled in dread. Their scans had detected only one life sign in the cryopod. Had they missed a second stasis chamber? Or worse, had the humans hidden others aboard their own vessel? The voice, Major Dex, responded, her tone edged with dark amusement. Good, then let's talk. A new alert blared across the command deck. Malvar's tactical display lit up with a proximity warning. A vessel, sleek and angular, materialized from the void just beyond their shields. No energy signature, no warp trail. It was as if it had been there all along, waiting in the darkness. Thalolan's breath hitched, cloaking beyond our spectrum. How? Dixon answered without turning. You study time like it's a river. We learn to swim in it. Malvar's mind reeled. The humans hadn't just survived the centuries, they had weaponized them, and now they were awake. Section Fe. The debrief the Malthari command deck hummed with the uneasy resonance of disrupted equilibrium. The air tasted metallic, ionized by the proximity of the human vessel, its angular silhouette pressing against the Malthari's organic viewports like a blade resting against skin. Malvar's neural filaments pulsed in erratic waves, struggling to reconcile the impossibility before them. The human ship had no right to exist, no right to move like that, emerging from the void without the telltale shimmer of a warp transition, without the graceful aurora of an Alcubierre wake. It simply was, as if it had carved its own pocket of reality and stepped through. Thalolan's tendrils flickered with pale violet distress, their bioluminescent panels dimmed, as though the ship itself recoiled from the presence of something unnatural. Their stealth systems, Thalolan murmured, voice thin by disbelief. They don't mask emissions, they erase them entirely. Major Caroline Dex stood at the center of the chamber, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady. She was a relic, a soldier from an era when humanity had barely breached their own solar system. And yet, she carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen the shape of time and found it malleable. Malvar's instincts screamed at him to retreat, to raise shields, to do something. But the human vessel hadn't fired, hadn't even powered weapons. It simply loomed, a silent promise of violence held in perfect restraint. Dixon leaned against a crystalline support pillar, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, tracked every shift in the Malthari's posture. You wanted to study us, he said. So study. Thalolan's tendrils coiled tighter. Their scanners had been useless from the start. The cryopod's readings had been incomplete, fragmented. They had assumed it was degradation, centuries of stasis eroding the human within. But now, watching Dex, watching the way her pulse remained steady, despite the adrenaline surely coursing through her veins, Thalolan wondered if the gaps in their data were deliberate. A final alert chimed, soft, almost apologetic. The Malthari's long-range sensors had finished their analysis of the human vessel. Malvar's breath stilled as the results unfolded across his neural display. No reactor signatures, no fuel traces, no identifiable propulsion. Just like the cryopod, just like the humans themselves, the ship wasn't powered. It wasn't moving. It was waiting. Dex tilted her head, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. Then she smiled, a slow, knowing thing. You've been watching us for a long time, she said, but you never asked the right question. Malvar's filaments burned with the effort of maintaining control. And what question is that? Dex stepped forward, and the deck lights flickered, not from power fluctuation, but from something deeper, something that resonated in the space between atoms. What were we running from? The command deck plunged into silence. Thalolan's mind raced. The cryopod hadn't been a preservation chamber. The ship wasn't a warship. They were hiding places, and whatever the humans had been hiding from, whatever had forced them to freeze themselves in time, to build vessels that slipped between the cracks of reality, was still out there. Dixon pushed off the pillar, his voice low. You think we're the monsters? He chuckled, dark and humorless. You haven't met the things that made us like this. Outside, the human ship pulsed once, a ripple of distorted light, a whisper of something vast and hungry stirring in the dark. And for the first time in centuries, Malvar felt true fear. The silence on the Malthari command deck was absolute. Not the quiet of contemplation, but the stillness of a predator caught mid-step, sensing something far larger in the dark. Thalolan's bioluminescent veins flickered erratically, casting jagged violet shadows across the crystalline consoles. His mind, usually a well-ordered lattice of logic, now fractured under the weight of revelation. The human ship, their ship, was not a relic. It was a warning. Malvar's filaments pulsed with restrained energy, his body rigid as he processed the implications. The humans had not been fleeing war. They had been fleeing extinction, and if something had driven them to such extremes, a low hum resonated through the deck, not from the Malthari vessel's organic systems, but from the human ship docked alongside them. The sound was wrong. Not mechanical, not biological, but something in between, a vibration that made the air itself feel thin. Thololin's tertiary eyelids flicked shut instinctively, a primal response to a frequency his species had never evolved to hear. Dixon hadn't moved. He stood with the casual lethality of a blade left balanced on its edge, his gaze locked on the viewport where the human vessel floated. Its hull, once inert, now shimmered with faint, crawling light, like veins under skin or circuitry waking from dormancy. Dex exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the suddenly cold air. "You wanted to study us," she said, her voice quiet. "Now you will." Thololin's tendrils coiled tight. "What have you done?" Dixon's lips curled, not in a smile, but in the baring of teeth. "Nothing yet." A tremor ran through the deck. The Malthari ship's atmospheric condensers hissed as the ambient temperature dropped further, moisture crystallizing on the curved silver walls. The alien crew exchanged glances, their bioluminescence dimming in unison, an instinctive retreat, like deep-sea creatures sensing a pressure change. Malvar forced himself to step forward, his filaments crackling with authority. "Explain." Dex turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. "You woke us. That means they know." Thololin's mind raced. The cryopod systems, the ship's dormant signatures. None of it had been passive. It had been hidden, camouflaged. And now the veil was lifting. Outside, the human ship's hull rippled. Not a distortion of light, but an actual flexing, as if something beneath the metal were shifting, stretching. The aurora, like energy that had once flowed gently along its surface, now twisted in agitated coils, lashing like a caged thing. Dixon's fingers twitched. "You ever see a trapdoor spider, Malvar?" The Malthari commander said nothing. "Doesn't hunt, doesn't chase." Dixon's voice was a low growl. "Just waits, lets the prey come to it." A proximity alert blared, not from the Malthari sensors, but from the human ship's ancient systems, a shrill, pulsing tone that cut through the silence. Thololin's tendrils jerked toward the readouts, but the data was chaos. Gravitational fluctuations, spatial distortions, energy signatures that spiked and vanished like phantom limbs. Then the stars moved, not the ship, not the debris field. The stars themselves twisted, their light stretching into jagged streaks as something vast and unseen, pressed against the fabric of reality. The viewport darkened, not from shadow, but from something pushing in, warping space like a hand pressing against wet cloth. Malvar's filaments went rigid. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The thing outside wasn't just hunting, it was remembering. Dex's hand settled on Dixon's shoulder. Time to go. The human ship's engines flared to life, not with the Malthari's elegant purple, white streams, but with a searing, violent light that scorched the void. The hull plates realigned, shedding layers of false decay, revealing the weapon systems beneath, spinal, mounted cannons, humming with contained Fury missile pods, unfolding like the petals of a steel flower. Thololin's voice was a whisper. "You lied." Dex didn't look back. "No, we just didn't tell you which war we were running from." The distortion beyond the viewport pulsed, and then the human ship, their ship, opened fire. Not at the Malthari, at the dark. The first railgun round shattered the silence, a hypersonic spear of tungsten that tore through the void and hit something. Space itself recoiled, a shockwave of twisted light rippling outward, as the unseen predator howled in a frequency that made the Malthari crew clutch their skulls. Dixon was already moving, his boots magnetizing to the deck as he sprinted for the airlock. Dex followed, her stride unhurried, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Malvar roared after them. "You cannot win." Dex paused at the threshold. For the first time, she smiled. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "We don't have to," she said. "We just have to survive." Then the airlock sealed behind her, and the human ship, awake, furious, and hungry, turned its guns toward the bleeding dark. And the Malthari finally understood. Humanity had never been the monsters. They were the survivors. The Malthari sensors screamed as the void bled. Where the human railgun round had struck, reality itself peeled back like burned flesh, revealing the nightmare beneath. A vast chitinous limb, blacker than the space between stars, thrashed in agony, its edges flickering with unnatural geometries that made the Malthari's eyes water. The thing had no true form, only hunger, a predator that had stalked the dark between galaxies long before the first Malthari crystal city had risen from the dust. And the humans knew it. Malvar watched, his secondary heart stuttering, as the Indomitable's weapons cycled with mechanical precision, not the reckless barrage he expected, but a surgeon's strikes, each shot calibrated, each impact driving the creature further into the light. The humans weren't fighting blind. They had done this before. A proximity alert shrieked. The creature's retaliation came as a wave of wrongness, a distortion that slithered through the Malthari ships, shields like smoke through fingers. Consoles exploded in sprays of molten crystal. 3 crew members collapsed, their bioluminescent veins darkening as the thing's presence unmade them from within. Then the human ship moved, not with the graceful arcs of Malthari thrusters, but a brutal engine, shearing lunge that positioned itself between the dying Malthari vessel and the abomination. The Indomitable's hull groaned under the strain, its armor blackening where the creature's tendrils brushed against it. But it held. Inside the airlock, Dixon's voice crackled over the comms, calm as a man discussing the weather. "Malvar, you might want to shut your eyes." The Malthari barely had time to process the warning before the humans unleashed their final weapon. A singularity charge. Space screamed as the miniature black hole detonated, twisting the creature into an impossible spiral of flesh and shadow before crushing it into nothingness. The Malthari ship was hurled backward, its systems flickering but intact. When the sensors cleared, the void was silent. No wreckage, no enemy, just the Indomitable, its hull scorched and bleeding coolant, hanging motionless in the dark. Malvar realized, with a dawning horror, what this meant. The humans hadn't built their ships for war. They'd built them for this. And if the galaxy had creatures like that lurking in the dark, perhaps humanity's brutality wasn't madness, it was mercy.